He boarded that plane expecting nothing more than a quiet flight home. A first-class ticket in his hand, a seat assignment clearly printed. But within minutes, everything changed. A senior flight attendant leaned over, her tone final, her mind made up. "Sir, you'll need to move." No explanation. No policy cited. Just the silent weight of an assumption about who belongs in that seat and who doesn't. What would you do? Would you argue, make a scene, or would you walk away and quietly set in motion something that would shake an entire airline, and soon an entire industry? This is not just the story of a seat. It's the story of one man's refusal to disappear, of a battle fought in silence, and won in the open, of how a single moment, captured on camera, became a turning point for thousands of unseen passengers. What happened on Flight 482 would leave executives scrambling, laws rewritten, and a question echoing in every passenger's mind. Who gets to belong? Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, because you're about to hear the story the airlines never wanted you to know. The soft glow of the cabin lights cast a warm hue over the plush leather seats of NorthStar Airlines Flight 482. Outside the oval windows, the tarmac shimmered in the late afternoon sun. A slow, steady hum of the air system filled the otherwise hushed first-class cabin. Elias Ward placed his sleek black carry-on in the overhead bin, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. He had done this countless times before. Seat 1A, his seat. He slid into it with practiced ease. The headrest cradled his neck, the smooth leather molding perfectly to his frame. The space around him was more than just comfortable. It was familiar. His boarding pass still glowed faintly on his phone screen. Ward, E, 1A, as if to reaffirm his rightful place here. Elias reached into his bag for a slim leather folio and his tablet. The markets had been restless this week, and he intended to review a set of reports before takeoff. This was his quiet time, before the inevitable swirl of meetings on the other side of the flight. The quiet didn't last long. A shadow fell across his table. Elias looked up to see a woman standing over him. Her navy uniform was immaculate, her hair pulled tightly back into a bun. The name tag pinned neatly to her jacket read Camille Torres. "Sir," she began, her voice polite but clipped, "I'm going to have to ask you to move." Elias blinked once, then set his tablet down slowly. "I'm sorry." His tone was even, but there was an unmistakable firmness beneath it. "There's been a seat assignment issue," Camille continued, her posture straightening slightly as she spoke. "This seat isn't for you." Elias leaned back, studying her. The hum of the cabin seemed louder now. "This is seat 1A, he said, lifting his phone so the glowing boarding pass was directly in her line of sight. "It's my assigned seat." Camille's gaze flickered to the phone, but didn't linger long enough to actually read the text. She nodded faintly, but her tone didn't change. "I understand, sir, but I'll still need you to move." There was something in the way she said it. The politeness was intact, the words professionally neutral, but there was an undercurrent. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the subtle inflection, the kind of tone Elias had heard before in boardrooms, at hotels, even at private clubs, a tone that implied he didn't quite belong. He placed his phone down gently on the armrest. "Ms. Torres, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My name is Elias Ward. I have this seat through a standing arrangement with NorthStar Airlines. I'd appreciate it if you could verify the passenger manifest." For a moment, Camille's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. She didn't reach for her handheld device. She didn't signal to the galley to pull up the manifest. She simply shook her head. "There's no need to verify," she said. I already know this seat is for another passenger. I can move you to Economy Plus. There's more leg room there than Standard Economy. I'm sure you'll be comfortable. Elias's jaw tightened, a subtle movement only someone watching closely would notice. He'd learned long ago not to let irritation surface. That only gave the other person the satisfaction of feeling justified. I prefer to remain in my assigned seat, he replied. His voice was calm, but it carried a certain weight. The exchange had begun to draw quiet attention. The man across the aisle, pretending to scroll on his phone, had angled the screen just enough to capture video, 2 rows back. A woman leaned slightly forward to get a better look. Camille didn't flinch. If you don't comply, I'll have to get the flight service manager involved. Elias nodded once, slowly. Please do. She turned sharply and walked toward the galley. Elias exhaled quietly through his nose. Not in defeat, but in calculation. This wasn't new. Different setting, same pattern. The details shifted, but the script was familiar. From the corner of his eye, he caught the man across the aisle tilting his phone again. Recording. Elias didn't mind. Sometimes you let the camera do the talking. Moments later, Camille returned this time with a man in his 50s. His graying hair was cropped short, his tie slightly loosened as if he'd been moving quickly. His name tag read, Martin Blake, Mr. Ward. Martin said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I understand there's a seating issue here. We have a VIP passenger scheduled for 1A, and it looks like there's been a mix-up. We can offer you a premium seat in Economy Plus extra legroom. Very comfortable. Elias met Martin's gaze evenly. I have a confirmed boarding pass for 1E, Mr. Blake. My arrangement with NorthStar guarantees this seat when available. It's in your system. I'd suggest you check it. Martin glanced at Camille. She gave the slightest shake of her head, almost imperceptible. We've already checked, he said. The seat is for another passenger today. Elias remained still. Then your system is wrong. And I'm not moving to Economy Plus. This is my seat. Martin's smile thinned. Sir, we need to get this flight out on time. If you don't move, we'll have to remove you from the aircraft. Silence stretched between them. Elias held his gaze, unblinking. The hum of the cabin felt heavier now. He could feel every pair of eyes in the first-class cabin fixed on him, waiting. I am not refusing to move from a seat I'm not entitled to, Elias said slowly. I am refusing to leave a seat I have purchased and am entitled to occupy. There is a difference. Camille's patience finally cracked. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his arm just above the elbow. Sir, please stand up. The contact was firm, not violent, but it crossed an unspoken line. Elias didn't pull away. He let her hand stay there, the gesture speaking louder than words. Then, with deliberate slowness, he rose to his feet. As he stepped into the aisle, Martin gestured toward the rear of the plane. The older white man waiting near the galley stepped forward. Without hesitation, Camille guided him into the warm indent Elias had left in seat 1A. Elias watched, his expression unreadable. The man settled in, oblivious or uninterested in the exchange that had just occurred. No one said a word as Elias picked up his carry-on and walked down the aisle. He kept his head high. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. The gate lounge was quieter than the aircraft had been, yet it carried its own kind of noise. The soft clink of coffee cups from the cafe, the low murmur of travelers on their phones, the occasional boarding call over the PA. Elias Ward sat in one of the rigid metal chairs near the window, his carry-on at his feet, the boarding pass still on his phone screen, as if daring anyone to dispute it. He didn't scroll through messages or check emails. He simply sat, hands loosely clasped, eyes resting on the runway outside. It was not the first time someone had looked at him and made an assumption, but the sting was sharper when it happened in places where the facts were easily verified, where technology could confirm truth in seconds. This was not about a seat. This was about a reflex that still thrived in subtle tones and confident dismissals. For most of his life, Elias had learned how to measure his response. There was a time, decades ago, when he might have met Camille Torres' tone with immediate challenge, letting indignation carry his words. But life had taught him that restraint could be a weapon, that silence could be more disarming than shouting. He thought back to his early years in Newark, New Jersey. His mother, a public school teacher, had raised him with an unshakable belief in preparation. "Never be caught without knowing your worth," she used to say. He had carried that into every classroom, every interview, every deal he ever sat down for. College had been an uphill climb, graduate school even steeper, but he had emerged with more than degrees. He had learned how systems worked, and more importantly, how to build systems that didn't fail people. Ward Global Strategies, the firm he had built from a 3-person consultancy into a multinational advisory powerhouse, was rooted in that belief. Over the years, they had guided corporations through complex transformations, focusing not only on profit margins but on ethical resilience. His personal portfolio was equally strategic. He didn't buy into companies for quick returns. He became a partner in shaping their future. NorthStar Airlines was one such investment. 3 years earlier, he had acquired a 17% stake, not just for financial gain, but because he believed the airline had the potential to lead in equitable service. Part of the agreement, a clause negotiated in meticulous detail, included a standing guarantee whenever available. Seat 1A would be reserved for him on any NorthStar flight he booked. It wasn't about status. It was about predictability, efficiency, and yes, the quiet acknowledgement of his role as a strategic partner. That agreement had been formalized in the same period he had proposed the passenger equity protocol. The system was designed to prevent exactly what had happened today: misjudgments, oversights, or biases that led to customers being treated as if they didn't belong. The protocol required staff to verify passenger details before making seat changes, to escalate disputes with documented steps, and to ensure that decisions were based on facts, not perceptions. It was practical, it was enforceable, and it was shelved. The official reason from NorthStar leadership was budget constraints. But Elias knew better. He had read between the lines of the CEO's reply. Avery Holt had thanked him for the proposal, praised its thoroughness, then dismissed it as unnecessary. "Our current processes work well." Holt had written, "Let's not overcomplicate things for situations that are rare and have minimal impact on profitability." Rare. Minimal impact. Elias had closed the email without replying. There was no point debating someone who believed equity was a cost instead of an asset. Now, sitting in the lounge, he could see the chain of cause and effect laid out as clearly as the runways outside. The incident with Camille wasn't an isolated misunderstanding. It was a direct consequence of a culture that treated fairness as optional. A woman's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Ward." He looked up to see a young woman in a crisp NorthStar uniform standing a few feet away. Her name tag read Naomi Chen. She seemed hesitant, her posture betraying both professionalism and unease. "Yes," Elias said. I was at the gate earlier," she began. "I just wanted to check if you were being rebooked." Elias studied her face. There was no guarded detachment in her expression, no trace of the dismissive certainty he had seen in Camille or Martin. Instead, there was curiosity and something else. Concern. "I'm waiting to hear from your manager," Elias said. Naomi hesitated, then lowered her voice slightly. "I don't mean to intrude, but I saw the boarding pass on your phone. It said 1A. You didn't look like someone trying to sneak into a seat." Elias gave a faint smile. "Appearances are powerful things. Ms. Chen." She looked down at her tablet, fingers moving quickly. "May I check something?" He nodded once. Her brow furrowed as she tapped through several screens. Then her eyes widened, just slightly. The kind of shift only someone trained to notice small tells would catch. She didn't say what she had found, not yet, but Elias knew the look. She had seen his profile. She knew who he was. "I'll be right back," she said quietly, as she walked away. Elias leaned back, letting the tension ease from his shoulders. It was already in motion. The truth had a way of seeping out, even without him forcing it. He thought about the man who had taken his seat. In all likelihood, that man would spend the flight unaware of the broader context, oblivious to the fact that his comfort had been purchased at the expense of someone else's dignity. That was the nature of these moments. They were invisible to those who benefited from them. The PA crackled overhead with a boarding call for another flight. Elias's phone buzzed once, a text from his assistant in New York. "Just 2 words, call me." He didn't answer. Not yet. This was still unfolding. Through the wide glass windows, he watched a line of aircraft taxi in slow, deliberate procession. Somewhere inside him, a plan was already taking shape. He wasn't interested in a scene. He wasn't interested in a quick apology or a free upgrade on another flight. Those were distractions. What mattered was forcing the system to confront itself. Naomi returned a few minutes later, her expression now more guarded. She sat in the empty seat beside him, an unusual breach of protocol for airline staff. "Mr. Ward," she said softly, "I think there's something you should know about what's on your file, and about what's not on theirs." Elias turned his head toward her, meeting her gaze. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Naomi Chen hesitated before speaking, as if measuring every word. Around them, the lounge continued its low-rhythm boarding calls, the roll of luggage wheels, the muffled chatter of travelers. She leaned slightly toward Elias, lowering her voice. "I pulled up your profile in our system," she began. "It's detailed. Platinum partner, strategic shareholder, contractual seating rights." She paused, biting her lip. "But on today's manifest, that note about seat 1A isn't there. It's been wiped." Elias's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Wiped." She nodded. "There's no indication in the visible records that you were guaranteed that seat, which means, to someone like Camille or Martin, you're just another first-class passenger who can be moved at will." Elias let the information settle in his mind. It was one thing for a frontline employee to make a bad call. It was another for the system to actively remove a safeguard. That was deliberate. Before he could ask more, a shadow moved over them. Martin Blake stood a few feet away, hands clasped loosely in front of him. His expression was tight, though he still wore the kind of forced smile that tried to smooth over conflict. "Mr. Ward," Martin said, "I think we need to clear the air." Elias didn't move. "Do we?" Martin glanced at Naomi, then back to Elias. "I understand you've been waiting here. I've confirmed we can offer you a premium seat on the next flight. It departs in 2 hours. Naomi shifted in her seat, her discomfort visible. Martin, I was just telling Mr. Ward. He cut her off with a slight lift of his hand. Naomi, thank you. I can take it from here. She hesitated, looking between them, but eventually stood and stepped away. Elias watched her go, then returned his gaze to Martin. I have no interest in a different flight, Mr. Blake. My interest was in sitting in the seat I purchased and am contractually entitled to. That seat was taken from me without verification. Martin's smile thinned. Sometimes we have to make quick adjustments for operational reasons. It's not personal. Elias studied him in silence for a moment. He could feel the temptation to let his voice rise, to call out the hypocrisy of a company that touted inclusion in press releases, but stripped away safeguards in practice. But that would give Martin the story he wanted, an unruly passenger causing a scene. Instead, Elias kept his tone calm. You removed me because you assumed I could be moved without consequence. And you assumed that because of something you saw, not because of anything in your records. Correct. Martin's jaw tightened. I removed you because the seat was assigned to someone else, and you didn't verify my claim when I showed you my boarding pass. Elias said. Martin didn't respond. The silence was its own answer. Elias leaned back slightly, still seated in the stiff lounge chair. I will decline your offer of a later flight. I'll make my own arrangements. There was a flicker of relief on Martin's face, quickly masked. That's your choice. Of course, but I'll need you to understand that this situation could have been resolved more smoothly if you'd complied earlier. Elias let the words hang in the air. He thought of his mother again, telling him that sometimes the only thing more powerful than speaking was choosing when not to. Mr. Blake, Elias said finally, the smoothness of a resolution is not the same as its fairness. Martin exhaled sharply, a sign of waning patience. I hope you have a good rest of your day. He turned and walked away, his shoulders stiff. Elias sat still, eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the glass. He could see a NorthStar aircraft pushing back from the gate, a slow, deliberate movement that felt almost meditative. There was a strange clarity in that moment, as if the noise of the lounge had faded entirely. The urge to act immediately pulsed under his skin. He could call Avery Holt directly. He could demand explanations, threaten legal action, even summon media contacts. But instinct told him to wait. Let the moment breathe. Let the evidence collect itself. From across the lounge, Naomi reappeared. She looked as if she had been debating whether to return. When she approached, her expression was apologetic, but also tinged with resolve. I'm sorry about that, she said quietly. Martin doesn't like staff contradicting him. Elias gave her a small nod. You didn't contradict him. You told the truth. She hesitated. I don't know why the note about your seat was missing, but I've seen things before. Quiet things. Passengers moved without real cause. People in certain seats suddenly reassigned. I don't think it's random. Her words were confirmation of something Elias had suspected for years, that bias didn't always arrive with a shout or a slur. Sometimes it slipped in through the smallest of openings, disguised as procedure. You should keep notes, he said. She blinked. Notes, details, dates, what you see. Someday, someone will ask for proof, and you'll have it. Naomi nodded slowly, as if committing to the idea. Across the room, Daniel Price, the man from the aisle seat, was leaning against a column, phone in hand. He caught Elias's eye and lifted the device slightly in a wordless signal. Elias inclined his head once in acknowledgement. The pieces were moving into place, not because Elias had pushed them, but because he had stepped aside and let them fall where they naturally would. People were watching, recording, thinking. That was how change began, not in a single confrontation, but in the space afterward, when everyone decided what they had just witnessed. Naomi checked her watch. "I should get back to the gate," she said. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry you were treated that way." "Don't apologize for them," Elias replied. "Just make sure you see it for what it is." She gave a faint smile, then turned and walked away, her dark hair catching the light from the high windows. Elias picked up his carry-on and stood. He didn't know yet which flight he would take next, or when, but he knew this wasn't over. It was never over when the problem was systemic. Today had simply given the system a face his. As he left the lounge, his phone buzzed again. This time, he answered. "It's Elias," he said into the receiver, his voice calm. "We're going to let it play out." Elias walked away from the lounge, each step deliberate, his carry-on rolling silently over the polished floor. He had learned long ago that presence mattered not just in boardrooms, but in every space where eyes might be watching, and they were watching now. As he passed gate C-14, a voice called out behind him, "Mr. Ward." He turned. It was Daniel Price, the man from the opposite aisle seat earlier. The phone in Daniel's hand was still out, but this time the camera wasn't running. "Yeah," Elias said. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have the whole thing, from when she first told you to move to when they brought in that other guy." Elias studied him, searching for the angle. There was always an angle. And Daniel said, "I'm a freelance journalist. Sometimes I cover corporate accountability stories. I don't know if you want this out there, but what I saw didn't sit right with me." The background hum of boarding announcements and rolling luggage seemed to dim for a moment. Elias weighed the offer in silence. He didn't need a viral video. He didn't want spectacle for spectacle's sake, but evidence had a way of forcing conversations that polite requests never could. "Send it to me," Elias said finally, unedited. Daniel nodded. "You got it." He tapped on his phone, then glanced up. "For what it's worth, I've flown this airline a dozen times. Never seen anyone pulled out of 1A mid-boarding." Elias gave a short nod. "That's because it's not supposed to happen." They exchanged contact information quickly, the kind of clean, minimal exchange that left little room for misinterpretation. Elias continued toward the exit. He passed the wide glass windows overlooking the runway, where the NorthStar Airlines Flight was still at the gate. He could see Camille moving briskly down the aisle, checking overhead bins. The man in 1A sat reclined, sipping a glass of champagne, completely untouched by the storm he had stepped into. The sight sharpened something in Elias's chest. Not rage exactly, but a cold clarity. Systems protect those who fit their assumptions and punish those who challenge them. It had always been that way. He turned toward the quieter end of the terminal, where a row of leather chairs faced the glass. Sitting down, he opened his phone. The video from Daniel had already arrived. Elias pressed play. There it was, the approach, Camille's clipped tone, his calm responses, the arrival of Martin Blake, the final moment when Camille's hand touched his arm. The camera caught it all, including the angle of her body, the slight lean forward that suggested control more than assistance. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough for anyone watching to hear the subtle imbalance in how he was being addressed. Enough to make people question why the boarding pass in his hand wasn't enough proof. His thumb hovered over the screen. He could send it to his communications director in under a minute. That would set off a chain reaction he couldn't reverse. Media calls, shareholder inquiries, internal investigations. It would force the conversation into the open. But timing mattered. Too soon. And it would look like a personal vendetta. Too late. And the airline could control the narrative. His phone buzzed with a new message. Naomi Chen. Just one line. They're talking about you in the galley. Elias typed back. What are they saying? Her reply came quickly. That you were handled before the flight so the VIP could board without questions. That someone from corporate sent the change to the manifest directly. Corporate. That word hit differently. This wasn't just a rogue decision by Martin Blake. Someone higher up had intervened. Elias stood, the decision solidifying in his mind. He didn't walk toward the gate. He walked toward the airline's executive lounge. The receptionist looked up as he approached, her polished smile faltering just slightly when she saw the intensity in his gaze. Welcome, sir. May I see I'm Elias Ward, he said evenly. Please tell your lounge manager I need to speak with them now. Her eyes widened, recognition dawning. Yes, of course. Mr. Ward, one moment. She disappeared into the back office. Less than a minute later, a tall man in a tailored navy suit emerged. His hair was silver at the temples, his expression measured. Mr. Ward, he said, offering a hand. I'm Julian Marsh, the regional lounge director. How can I help you? Elias didn't shake his hand. You can tell me why my contractual seat guarantee was removed from today's manifest. Marsh blinked. I'm not sure. You are sure, Elias interrupted, his voice calm but leaving no room for deflection. A corporate override was sent to the flight crew. I want to know who sent it. Marsh's mouth tightened. That's not information I'm authorized to share. Then you can tell Avery Holt that Elias Ward is requesting a call in the next 10 minutes. Elias said. And that if I don't get one, this goes beyond NorthStar. The pause that followed was telling. Marsh's eyes flickered. A silent calculation. I'll see what I can do, he said finally. Elias stepped back, giving him room to pass. As Marsh disappeared into the office, Elias moved to a corner table. Setting his carry-on beside him, he could feel the tension building in his chest. Not the kind that clouded thought, but the kind that sharpened it. His phone vibrated again. Another message from Naomi. Be careful. Camille just said you might be blacklisted for causing a disturbance. He exhaled slowly. So that was the next move paint him as the problem. Turn the conversation away from why it started. It was a playbook he'd seen before. Across the lounge. Marsh returned, his expression tighter than before. Mr. Ward, he said. Mr. Holt will call you shortly. In the meantime, is there anything I can get you? Elias met his gaze. No, I'm fine. Marsh nodded once and stepped away. Elias sat back, his phone in hand. He thought about the video, about Naomi's warnings, about the quiet way Martin Blake had tried to usher him out of sight. All of it pointed to the same truth. The incident on Flight 482 was more than a misunderstanding. It was a decision, and decisions could be traced. He knew what would happen once the call came. There would be polite apologies, vague assurances, and an attempt to contain the story. But he wasn't interested in containment. He was interested in accountability. The phone buzzed again, and this time, the caller ID made his lips press into a thin line. Avery Holt. He answered with a single word. Holt. Elias lifted the phone to his ear, his voice steady. Holt. For a moment, there was only the faint hum of the line. Then Avery Holt's voice came through. smooth and practiced. The kind of voice trained to manage crises before they had a chance to ignite. Elias, I understand there's been an unfortunate incident. Elias let the silence hang just long enough to make the point. You understand. Or you've been told, Avery chuckled lightly. But there was no humor in it. I've been briefed. Our team explained there was a seating conflict. These things happen. I wanted to personally assure you it wasn't intentional. Elias leaned back in his chair, his eyes on the large window overlooking the tarmac. You're calling me to tell me it wasn't intentional after my contractual seat assignment was manually removed from the manifest? That's interesting. Avery paused. I'll need to look into the specifics of that. No, Elias said. You won't need to look. You already know. You have someone in corporate who thought they could override the agreement. You have crew members who thought their assumptions outweighed policy. And now you have me on the other end of this call, deciding what to do next. The line was quiet for a beat. Then Avery shifted tactics. Elias, we've been partners for a long time. I value what you've brought to NorthStar. Let's not allow a misunderstanding to disrupt that relationship. I can ensure this doesn't happen again. That's not enough, Elias said calmly. This isn't about me getting a seat back. This is about why it was taken in the first place. Avery's voice tightened. You're reading too much into this. These isolated moments? They're not isolated, Elias interrupted, his tone still level but edged with steel. I proposed the passenger equity protocol for this exact reason. You shelved it. You told me these incidents were rare, minimal impact. And here we are. If it's happening to me, it's happening to others who don't have the leverage I do. On the other end, Avery exhaled sharply, the sound picked up by the microphone. What is it you're asking for? Elias's eyes followed the slow taxi of a departing plane. First, I want the name of the person who authorized the manifest change. Second, I want your commitment on record to implement the passenger equity protocol in full, without delay. That's a significant operational shift, Avery said. It's the cost of doing business, Elias replied. There was another long silence, one that told Elias the man was weighing optics against principle, and finding the latter unfamiliar territory. I can get you the first, Avery said at last. The second, I'll have to discuss with the board. Elias almost smiled, though there was no warmth in it. You won't have to. The board will discuss it with you once they see the footage. You're threatening me. Avery's tone sharpened. I'm telling you what will happen, Elias said. You've spent years selling NorthStar as a brand that values every passenger equally. Right now, you have proof that's not true. I can handle it quietly within our partnership, or the public can handle it for you. Which would you prefer? The pause was shorter this time. Give me 24 hours, Avery said finally. You have 12, Elias replied. And Avery, choose your next move carefully, because so will I. He ended the call before Holt could answer. Elias set the phone down and sat still, letting the adrenaline settle into something sharper. There was a peculiar calm that came after these conversations, a quiet understanding that the first shot had been fired, and that nothing would be the same once it landed. Across the lounge, Julian Marsh glanced his way, curiosity flickering in his eyes. He didn't approach, and Elias didn't invite him over. Some people needed to remain exactly where they were, close enough to observe, far enough to stay out of the crossfire. Elias picked up his carry-on and left the lounge, moving toward a quieter part of the terminal. He needed space to think. Space without the controlled smiles of airline staff or the murmurs of fellow passengers who thought they knew the whole story. Near the far end of the concourse, he found a row of empty chairs facing a wide window. Outside, the sun was beginning to lower, casting a golden haze over the tarmac. Planes moved in slow arcs, guided by unseen lines of authority. It was a reminder that the system, however vast, was still run by people who could be challenged. His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Daniel Price. "Got something else you should see? Passenger in 1A talking to crew before you boarded. Looks like they knew each other." Elias opened the attachment. It was a short clip, shaky but clear enough to catch the exchange. The man now sitting in 1A was speaking casually with Camille Torres, both of them smiling as she gestured toward the front of the cabin. It wasn't damning in itself, but paired with everything else, it painted a picture. This wasn't a neutral reassignment. Another buzz. Naomi again. Camille just told someone you shouldn't be in first class if you're not a regular on their roster. Elias's jaw set, the arrogance of it as if the cabin were a private club instead of a paid service. He typed back, "Save everything. We'll need it." For a long moment, he sat with his thoughts. His mother's voice was there again, steady and clear. Don't fight to win the moment. Fight to change the outcome. He knew what came next. 12 hours would pass quickly, and Holt would try to negotiate down the stakes. But the pieces were aligning: the footage, the witnesses, the paper trail of the manifest change. It was enough to make this not just a personal grievance, but a case study in systemic bias. He reached for his phone again, this time opening his contacts and scrolling to a number labeled simply board chair. His thumb hovered, then pressed call. When the voice answered, warm but formal, Elias said, "It's Ward. I need you to clear your schedule tomorrow. There's something the board needs to see." The voice of the board chair came through the phone, calm but curious. "What exactly are we looking at tomorrow?" Elias. "You'll see," Elias said, his gaze fixed on the slow taxi of a NorthStar jet outside the window. "But when you do, I want you to remember it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because the system allowed it." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that meant questions were forming, but wouldn't be asked not yet. "Understood. I'll be in touch." Elias ended the call and sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the terminal filling the space around him. He thought of the countless boardrooms he had sat in over the years, the polished tables, the expensive art, the quiet power that hummed in the air. This time, the room would not be a sanctuary for polite conversation. This time, it would be an operating table. He opened his laptop, the familiar weight grounding him. Files blinked to life, neat and organized his way of imposing order on chaos. In a few clicks, he had Daniel Price's video saved, Naomi's messages archived, and the clip of the man in 1A speaking to Camille set aside. Each piece was a thread, and together they could unravel something much larger than a single flight. He began typing notes, not just what had happened, but the patterns it revealed. The passenger equity protocol he had proposed months ago sat in another folder, a detailed, implementable policy that would have prevented this. Avery Holt had shelved it, claiming it was logistically overreaching. Elias made sure that file was ready to reopen in front of every board member tomorrow. Passengers streamed by behind him, their footsteps and voices a moving backdrop. He tuned them out, focusing on building the narrative policy ignored, agreements violated, bias evident in crew behavior. He wrote without embellishment. The facts were enough. Half an hour later, His phone buzzed. Naomi again. Their wheels up. Heard Camille say she hopes you learned your place. Elias's fingers paused over the keyboard. He could almost hear her voice in his head, the exact inflection, the unguarded arrogance. He typed back, "Thank you. Stay quiet for now." A few seats away. Daniel Price slid into the chair opposite him. "I've got the full footage uploading to a secure drive. You want me to redact any faces?" "Leave them," Elias said. "They acted in a public capacity. The public has a right to see it." Daniel nodded slowly. "This is going to blow up fast. You know, people get loud when they see something this blatant." "I'm counting on it," Elias replied. Daniel studied him for a moment, as if measuring the difference between a man who wanted justice and a man who wanted retribution. "You're not doing this just for you. Are you?" Elias shook his head. "If this was just about me, I'd take the call from Holt, accept the apology, and let it die. But I've been watching this happen for years to people without a title, without a platform. I'm not interested in another quiet settlement." Daniel's eyes narrowed, a faint respect in his expression. "Then you're going to need more than video. You're going to need context, numbers, patterns." "I already have them," Elias said, closing the laptop with deliberate care. "What I need now is a stage." The overhead speakers chimed, announcing the final boarding call for a flight to Chicago. Elias watched as the last few passengers hurried toward the gate. The choreography of travel the scans, the nods, the polite half-smiles was a ritual he knew well. But rituals could hide rot. He thought about his own beginnings, the early days when he couldn't afford even economy tickets. Back then, every trip was a gamble, on weather, on work, on whether he'd be treated with basic respect. It was why he'd worked so hard to climb, not just for the view, but to prove that altitude didn't change who deserved dignity. His phone vibrated again, this time with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Ward." The voice was young, female, uncertain. "My name is Melissa. I was on your flight earlier. I was in row 3. Elias shifted in his seat. "Yes, I saw what happened," she said, her words tumbling out. "It wasn't right. I've had something similar happen before, but I didn't know I could push back. When they told you to move, the way you stayed calm, it made me think maybe I should have." For a moment, Elias didn't answer. This was the real point. Not the policy fight, not the boardroom battle, but the fact that someone watching might decide they deserved better next time. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "Hold on to that thought, and next time, don't wait for permission to keep your seat." Melissa gave a small, nervous laugh. "I won't." She hesitated. "Do you think they'll get in trouble?" Elias's voice was steady. "If I have anything to do with it, they'll be held accountable. That's different from trouble. Trouble fades. Accountability changes behavior." When the call ended, Elias sat for a moment, looking out at the runway. Somewhere in the sky, the plane he was supposed to be on was slicing through clouds, carrying a cabin full of people who had witnessed a piece of the story, but not the whole of it. Tomorrow, the rest would come into focus. He reopened his laptop and began assembling a final document, a clean, concise brief that would walk the board through the events in chronological order. No drama, no excess, just the facts, the footage, the policy gap, and the opportunity to fix it. An hour passed like that, his concentration unbroken until the shifting light of the setting sun stretched long shadows across the terminal floor. He closed the laptop and packed it away. his mind already moving to tomorrow's logistics, the time of the meeting, the faces around the table, the first person to speak after he presented. Standing. He adjusted his jacket, the small weight of his carry-on steady in his hand. The fight wasn't over. It hadn't even really begun. As he walked toward the exit, a group of arriving passengers brushed past him. Their laughter and easy energy stood in contrast to the day he'd just lived. But there was something grounding in it, a reminder that the world kept moving, even while you were planning to change a part of it. Outside, the evening air was cool, the scent of jet fuel faint but familiar. Elias paused on the curb, letting the quiet settle before flagging down a car. Tomorrow would be loud enough. The glass doors of NorthStar Airlines headquarters glided open with a soft hiss as Elias stepped inside. The morning air still clung to his jacket, crisp and sharp, but the lobby was warm, scented faintly of polished wood and coffee. A receptionist glanced up, clearly recognizing him, but her polite greeting stuck in her throat at the look in his eyes. He didn't slow down. His stride was purposeful, the echo of his footsteps carrying across the marble floor. The elevator ride to the 12th floor was silent except for the soft chime of each passing level. When the doors opened, he was met with a wall of glass revealing the boardroom beyond long, sleek and ready. Inside, 11 people sat around the massive oval table, the board chair. A tall man with neatly combed silver hair rose as Elias entered. "Elias," he said, offering a hand. "We appreciate you coming on such short notice." Elias took the seat at the far end of the table, deliberately placing his laptop in the center. "This isn't a courtesy visit," he said quietly. "It's a necessity." The chair nodded once and gestured for him to proceed. Elias opened the laptop, the screen casting a pale light on his face. "Yesterday, I was removed from my contractual seat in 1A on Flight 482 from Atlanta to Los Angeles. There was no operational necessity. The reassignment was initiated by a corporate override, bypassing both policy and crew discretion." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Elias tapped a key, and the video from Daniel Price appeared on the wall-mounted screen. The room was silent except for the audio Camille Torres's voice instructing him to move, his measured responses, the arrival of Martin Blake, and the moment her hand touched his arm, he let it play without commentary. When it ended, he advanced to the next file, the clip of the man in 1A chatting with Camille before boarding, her gestures toward the seat. "This," Elias said, "is what your rare incidents look like when documented." One of the board members, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, spoke up. "Do we know who issued the override?" Elias clicked to another slide, a copy of the manifest changelog. "Yes." The authorization came from Karen Barlow, Senior VP of Customer Relations. She approved the change at 9:42. 12 minutes before boarding began. A murmur passed around the table. The board chair leaned forward. Why Elias's gaze was steady. "Because the man who took my seat is one of her personal contacts. She decided his comfort outweighed my contractual rights. And, I suspect, she assumed I would be less likely to challenge it." The air in the room thickened. Elias reached into his bag and pulled out another file, the passenger equity protocol he'd proposed months ago. He slid copies down the table. "This is the policy that would have prevented yesterday's incident. You shelved it. Now you've seen why it's necessary." A younger board member, perhaps mid-30s, leaned back in his chair. "Elias, what exactly are you asking us to do here?" "Adopt the protocol immediately," Elias said. "Issue a public acknowledgement of the incident. Name the policy changes, and commit to enforcement." and make it clear from top to bottom that overrides like this will have consequences. There was a beat of silence before another voice spoke, a man in a dark blue suit. The CFO. That's a significant operational commitment. We're talking retraining, restructuring, and possible legal exposure. Elias's tone didn't shift. The exposure already exists. You can address it now, or you can face it in the court of public opinion when this footage goes live. The board chair raised a hand. Elias. Are you saying you'll release this? I'm saying, Elias replied, that the choice is yours whether the release is accompanied by your proactive reform or by your defensive excuses. Eyes darted around the table. Elias could see the calculation in their faces, the weighing of cost against image, of ethics against expedience. He didn't fill the silence. Silence was leverage. Finally, the chair cleared his throat. We'll need a private discussion. Would you step outside for a few minutes? Elias closed his laptop. 10 minutes, he said, rising. After that, I'll assume your answer is no. The hallway outside was quieter than he expected. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out under the pale light of morning. Elias stood with his hands clasped loosely behind his back. His reflection in the glass a reminder of the years it had taken to get here. Not just to this building, but to this position, where he could push back without fear of losing everything. He thought about Melissa from row 3, about Naomi risking her job to send him messages, about the hundreds of passengers who'd been quietly shuffled out of their rights because someone decided they didn't belong in a certain seat. 10 minutes passed, almost to the second, before the board chair stepped into the hall. His expression was measured, but different now, less guarded, more resolved. Elias, he said, the board has agreed to adopt the passenger equity protocol, effective immediately. There will be a public announcement by the end of the week. Karen Barlow will be placed on administrative leave pending a formal review. Elias studied him for a moment. And Camille Torres. She'll be removed from passenger-facing duties during the review process. The chair said. Elias gave a single nod. That's a start. The chair hesitated. We'd prefer if you didn't release the footage until after the internal measures are in place. I'll consider it, Elias said, his tone making it clear he'd make that decision himself. They shook hands, the kind of handshake that was more about terms than trust. As Elias rode the elevator back down, a quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. Not the satisfaction of winning this wasn't that kind of battle, but of moving the line forward, even if only an inch. The real work would be in ensuring the change wasn't just cosmetic. In the lobby, Daniel Price was waiting, leaning casually against a column. Well, he asked. They'll adopt the protocol, Elias said, and the people responsible are being pulled off the front lines. Daniel gave a low whistle. Fast turnaround. They move fast when they're scared, Elias replied. Daniel smiled faintly. So, you still want me to hold the footage? For now, Elias said, but keep it ready. Some fights need the light. They walked toward the exit together, the glass doors parting ahead of them. Outside, the morning had warmed, the city alive with movement. Elias felt the shift not just in the boardroom, but in the air around him, somewhere in the sky. Another NorthStar flight was boarding, passengers finding their seats, and maybe, just maybe, one less person would be told they didn't belong there today. By the following morning, the air in the city felt different. Elias could sense it before he even opened his phone. Something about the pace of footsteps outside his apartment building, the way conversations drifted from passing cars, told him the announcement had gone out. When he finally checked, the NorthStar press release was everywhere reposted, analyzed, dissected, NorthStar Airlines implements passenger equity protocol. Senior VP placed on administrative leave. The statement was polished. Of course, designed to frame the decision as a proactive choice rather than the product of intense pressure. It mentioned the company's commitment to equity and respect for all passengers, but conspicuously avoided naming Elias. He didn't mind. This wasn't about his name in the headline. It was about the fact that the policy was now in black and white. The rules had changed. And once rules were written down, they were harder to quietly ignore. Still, as he scrolled, he noticed something else. The conversation online was filling in the blanks the press release had left empty. A post from Naomi, careful, without breaching her NDA, hinted at a decisive voice in the room who had made this happen. Daniel Price's account had a cryptic tweet. Sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to move. Within hours, speculation threads were running wild. Names were being floated, and by midday, someone had linked the change to the incident on Flight 482. A blurry still frame from Daniel's video, Elias standing calmly in the aisle as Camille spoke to him, had gone viral. By noon, his phone was buzzing nonstop. Journalists wanted comment. Advocacy groups wanted quotes. Even a late-night show had requested an interview. Elias ignored most of it. He'd been in the public eye before, and he knew how quickly narratives could slip out of your control. This wasn't a story he wanted twisted into spectacle. Instead, he went for a walk. The late morning sun painted the streets gold, and the scent of roasted coffee from a nearby cafe pulled him inside. He ordered a black coffee and found a small table near the window. As he sat, he thought about his mother again. She had always warned him that victories could be as dangerous as defeats. People will want you to enjoy the win so much, she'd say, that you stop watching what they do next. A shadow fell across the table. Mr. Ward. He looked up to see Melissa, the young woman from row 3, clutching a paper cup with both hands. She looked hesitant, almost apologetic. I wasn't sure if you'd remember me, she said. I do, Elias replied. Have a seat. She sat, her cheeks flushed. I saw the news. I wanted to thank you. Again. I don't know if I would have ever spoken up for myself if I hadn't seen you stay calm that day. Elias studied her face, the way her fingers gripped the cup like it was something to hold on to. You don't need me to give you permission to stand your ground, Melissa. But I'm glad if I helped you see that you can. Her voice lowered. I've been thinking about something you said about accountability being different from trouble. I've been wondering if that's what scares them the most. Elias nodded slowly. Trouble fades. Accountability stays on the books. She smiled faintly, then stood. Well, for what it's worth, I'm telling people what I saw. I think more of us should. When she left, Elias sat for a long moment, watching people move past the window. There was a quiet weight in knowing your actions had rippled into someone else's life. By mid-afternoon, the first op-eds began appearing. One headline read, NorthStar's equity protocol is a step forward but only if it's enforced. Another was more blunt. Would this policy exist? If the passenger hadn't been a CEO, that one stayed with him. It was the question he'd been asking himself from the moment the board agreed to adopt the protocol. He knew the truth, probably not, and that meant the work wasn't done. At 4 o'clock, his phone buzzed again. Naomi, internal memo just went out. Camille Torres has been reassigned to ground training. Not permanent yet. Elias typed back, Thanks for letting me know. Keep me posted. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The board's actions were quick, but he'd been in enough corporate environments to know quick didn't always mean lasting. This could still be quietly rolled back in a few months if no one was watching. He decided he wouldn't let that happen. That evening, Daniel called. "You know, this footage isn't going away. Sooner or later, someone's going to leak it if you don't." Elias considered it. If it leaks now, the company frames it as a closed case. I want it to stay open. The protocol is just the start. I want people asking if it's working 6 months from now. Daniel chuckled. "So you're going to slow play it?" "I'm going to make sure it stays alive long enough to matter," Elias corrected. After the call, Elias stood by his apartment window, looking out at the city lights. He could feel the shift inside himself, the quiet satisfaction of a win tempered by the understanding that the win was only a foothold. He thought again about the passengers who would never know his name, who would just notice that the boarding process felt different, fairer. That was enough. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. And he also knew NorthStar wasn't the only airline with this problem. Tomorrow, he would start making calls. 2 days after NorthStar's announcement, the congratulatory messages began to thin out, replaced by something colder. Elias noticed it first in the tone of emails forwarded to him by allies inside the company. Phrases like overreaction, PR stunt, and CEO privilege buried inside longer threads. Then the opinion pieces shifted. A prominent business columnist wrote, "We should applaud NorthStar's equity policy, but we must ask why it took a powerful insider to make it happen. Ordinary passengers don't have Elias Ward's leverage." The comments sections were worse. Some praised him. Others accused him of manufacturing outrage for personal gain. Elias had expected it. Change never came without backlash. But expecting it didn't make it easier to read. That afternoon, his assistant buzzed him. "Avery Holt is on line 2. Says it's urgent." Elias took the call. Holt's voice came through clipped, almost metallic. "You've made your point. Elias, the protocol's in place. Barlow's on leave. But this media circus is making it harder for us to stabilize operations." Elias leaned back in his chair. "The media isn't my concern, Avery. The policy is. You've been in business long enough to know perception shapes everything," Holt said sharply. "If the public thinks we're unstable, bookings drop. If bookings drop, so do jobs. And if passengers think we discriminate, bookings drop faster," Elias countered. "You know which perception will cost you more in the long run?" There was a pause. When Holt spoke again, his voice was lower but sharper. "Be careful. Elias, your name is being tied to this in ways you can't control. People are digging. You won't like where they go." Elias's grip on the phone tightened. "Are you threatening me? I'm telling you what's already in motion," Holt replied. "This could get ugly." The line went dead. Elias sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of what Holt had implied. He knew the tactic shift the focus from the issue to the person raising it. Discredit the messenger, and you weaken the message. He opened his laptop and began searching his own name. Sure enough, a few low-credibility blogs had started posting selective versions of his biography, cherry-picked facts framed to make him look like a ruthless opportunist. They left out the years of pro bono work, the advocacy projects, the quiet policy wins. Those didn't serve the narrative. By evening, Daniel Price called. "You're aware they're coming after you now, I am," Elias said. "You could get ahead of it," Daniel suggested. "Go on record. Tell your version before theirs sticks." Elias thought about it. Not yet. If I speak now, the story becomes about me. I want it to stay about the protocol." Daniel exhaled. "That's a high-wire act. My friend, they're counting on you staying silent long enough for their version to harden." "I know," Elias said. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing Holt's voice in his head. He thought about what was at stake, not just his reputation, but the credibility of the very idea that a passenger could hold an airline accountable without an army of lawyers. Around midnight, he got up and made tea. Standing in the dim light of his kitchen, he thought of Melissa, of Naomi, of the hundreds of passengers who wouldn't know his name but might be spared the humiliation he'd faced. He decided he could take a few bruises to keep that possibility alive. The next morning, Naomi messaged him again. "Camille Torres has filed a grievance. Says she was unfairly targeted because of social media pressure." Elias typed back, "Expected. Document everything." He knew Camille's move was less about winning her grievance and more about reframing herself as a victim in the public eye. It was a familiar play, one that could sway people who didn't know the full story. By midweek, an internal memo leaked anonymous, unsigned, accusing certain individuals of using isolated incidents to gain influence over company operations. It didn't name him, but the implication was obvious. Elias printed the memo and tucked it into his folder for the next board review. Let them see what culture they were still protecting. On Thursday, his phone rang again. This time it was Melissa. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I've been reading the comments online. They're going after you." "I know," Elias said softly. "It's not right," she said. "If you want, I'll speak up about what I saw. I'll go on record." Elias felt a small knot in his chest loosen. "I appreciate that, Melissa, but you don't owe me that. This isn't your fight to carry." "I think it is," she said firmly. "I was in that seat. I saw the way they talk to you. If people like me don't say something, then they'll just keep saying it's all in your head." Elias closed his eyes for a moment. "If you're sure, Daniel Price can connect you with a few reporters I trust. But take your time. Think it through. Once you speak, you can't take it back." "I've thought it through," Melissa said. "I'm tired of thinking it through." After the call, Elias stood at the window again, watching the city pulse below. The backlash was building, but so was the resistance. And for the first time since Holt's call, he felt the balance shift, however slightly. By Friday morning, the smear pieces had multiplied. Headlines framed in suspicion now dotted the business news feeds. Was the protocol a power grab? The CEO who played the passenger card? Equity policy or personal agenda? Elias read them in silence, his coffee growing cold on the table beside him. He had expected resistance. He had prepared for denial. But this calculated reframing was something else entirely. When his phone rang, he recognized Daniel Price's voice before the caller ID even lit up. "They've gone full tilt. Elias, I think Holt's feeding them quotes off the record." Elias rubbed his temple. That would explain the sudden consistency in tone. Daniel hesitated. "It's time. You have to speak. Right now. The story is a vacuum, and they're filling it." Elias glanced toward the folder on his desk, the one marked Flight 4A2, Witness Statements. Inside were messages from passengers, including Melissa's signed account. He had been holding it back, waiting for the right moment. "I'll do it," Elias said finally. "But not a press conference. I want it in my own words. Within hours." Daniel had arranged for an op-ed slot with a national paper. That afternoon, Elias sat in his study, the cursor blinking against the white screen. He started slowly, the way he always did when the stakes were high, letting the rhythm build. He wrote about the moment he boarded Flight 482, about the quiet assumptions embedded in a simple reassignment. He described the look on Melissa's face, the way Naomi's messages buzzed against his phone, the sound of Camille's voice when she told him to move. But he didn't stop there. He pulled the lens wider, writing about the thousands of small, invisible removals that never make the news, the policies written without scrutiny, the power exercised without consequence. By the time he finished, the piece wasn't about him at all. It was about a system designed to move certain people out of certain spaces without anyone asking why. He sent it to Daniel, who replied within minutes. It's going to make them furious, and that means it's perfect. The op-ed went live at dawn the next day. By breakfast, it was the most read article on the site. Social media lit up with excerpts. The seat itself isn't the point. The point is who is seen as belonging there and who isn't. Policies without transparency are just preferences dressed as procedure. Holt called before 9. "So you've decided to escalate," he said, voice tight. "I've decided to tell the truth." Elias replied, "You've just made yourself the face of this, Elias. When the backlash hits harder, don't say I didn't warn you." Elias didn't respond to the threat. Instead, he said, "Funny thing about a face. Avery, once it's visible, people remember it, and they notice when it's missing." By noon, the tide had begun to shift. A major morning show invited him on for a live interview. He declined, but sent Melissa instead, alongside another passenger from the flight. They spoke plainly about what they had seen, their accounts aligning in every detail. Watching from his office, Elias saw how the interviewer leaned forward when Melissa described the moment Camille reached for his arm. It wasn't loud. She said it wasn't aggressive, but it was final, like she knew he would comply. Her voice wavered slightly. And I think that's the part that stayed with me, the certainty she had that he'd step aside. By evening, the leaked memo targeting Elias had been traced back to a mid-level PR manager, one who, according to internal emails, had been instructed to soften the Ward narrative. That manager was suspended within hours. Still, Elias knew Holt wouldn't stop. This wasn't just about optics for him, it was about control. And Holt had just lost the ability to manage the story in silence. Late that night, Naomi sent one more message. "Barlow's trying to angle her way back in before the review is over. Claims the policy rollout is unmanageable without her." Elias stared at the text for a long moment. He typed back, "Then we make it unmanageable for her to return." The next morning, he met Daniel at a quiet cafe. The place was mostly empty, sunlight spilling in through the wide windows. "They've underestimated how patient you are," Daniel said as he stirred his coffee. "They think patience is passivity," Elias replied. "But patience is preparation." "You're going to drop the video, aren't you?" Daniel asked. Elias smiled faintly. "Not yet, but soon. And when I do, it won't just be about NorthStar. It'll be about every airline that thinks this is someone else's problem." Daniel leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "That's going to hit like a storm." "That's the point," Elias said. "If they want to make me the face of this, then I'll make sure they can't ignore what comes with it." As they left the cafe, the city felt sharper somehow, the air clearer. The fight was no longer happening behind boardroom doors or in leaked memos. It was happening out in the open now, where everyone could see, and Elias knew that was exactly where it needed to be. The following week, Elias's op-ed was still being discussed on morning panels, but Holt had managed to slow the momentum. The airline issued a string of polished statements about internal evaluations and ongoing commitments, hoping to dull the story until it faded. But Elias knew something Holt didn't. The story wasn't going to fade. Not when he was holding the one thing that could reignite it at will: the footage. Daniel Price had sent him the raw file months ago. The entire 3-minute exchange between Elias and Camille on Flight 482. It showed everything: Camille leaning over him with that firm, final tone. The quiet shift in passengers' posture when they realized what was happening. The flicker of disbelief in Melissa's eyes. Elias had been saving it for when the narrative was teetering, and now it was. That morning, he called Daniel. It's time. Daniel didn't ask which time. He knew. Where do you want it to go first? Somewhere they can't spin it, Elias said. And somewhere the passengers from that flight can add their voices. Within hours. The footage was uploaded to a verified advocacy account with a short caption. This is what procedure looks like when no one is watching. The video exploded. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Og, site R482, of belonging matters. Wo were passenger protocol. Clips were shared across every platform. People slowed it down, zoomed in, highlighted the subtle gestures, the quick glance between Camille and Martin Blake, the way his boarding pass was taken from his hand without explanation. By noon, Melissa posted her own statement alongside the video. This is exactly how it happened. No edits, no tricks. I was there. Naomi followed, writing, policies protect people when they're followed fairly. That day, they weren't. News outlets picked it up instantly. The footage ran on evening broadcasts with side-by-side commentary from aviation analysts and civil rights attorneys. One attorney said, "What strikes me most is the composure he maintains in the face of overt displacement. This isn't a man looking for a fight. This is a man refusing to disappear." Holt didn't call this time. Instead, an internal memo went out to all NorthStar staff, instructing them not to comment publicly. But it was too late. Former employees were already speaking, telling their own stories about similar incidents. That night, Elias walked into his apartment to find his voicemail. Full journalists, advocacy groups, even 2 senators requesting private meetings. He poured himself a glass of water and sat in the quiet, letting the noise of the outside world stay outside. Then his phone buzzed. Naomi again. Camille's been suspended pending a full review. Barlow's return is under reconsideration. Holt is under pressure from the board. Elias stared at the message for a moment. This was what pressure looked like when it finally landed in the right place. He called Daniel. It's not just about them anymore, Elias said. We can use this to push for an industry-wide protocol one every carrier has to follow. That's bigger than NorthStar, Daniel said. You're going to need allies in the federal space. I already have a few, Elias replied. They've just been waiting for the right moment. Now they have it. The next morning, Elias met with a small group in a quiet conference room downtown: 2 senators, an aviation consumer advocate, and a retired airline captain who'd spent years pushing for reform. This is your window, the captain said. They're on the defensive. You can push for transparency and boarding reassignments across the industry. One senator leaned forward. If we can get public momentum behind it, we could tie it to FAA compliance. No carrier wants to risk losing federal contracts over this. Elias nodded. Then let's do it. But we keep the tone steady. This isn't about vengeance, it's about prevention. By evening, a draft proposal was in motion, the Passenger Equity and Transparency Act. It would require airlines to document and publicly report all seat reassignments made after boarding, including the reason and the staff member responsible. Meanwhile, the video continued to rack up views 10 million, 20, 30. Civil rights groups began framing it as a teaching tool, dissecting each second to show how bias can operate quietly, without raised voices or explicit slurs. Holt finally called late that night. His voice was hoarse. "You've left me no choice. The board wants this gone, but you've tied it to legislation. Do you understand what you're doing?" "I do," Elias said calmly. "I'm making sure this doesn't happen to the next person who doesn't have a platform." "You think you've won," Holt said, his tone slipping toward bitterness. "No," Elias replied. "I think the passengers have a chance to—" There was a long silence before Holt spoke again. "The board will meet Monday. Don't be surprised if they try to cut ties with you entirely." Elias smiled faintly. "They can try after the call." Elias stood by the window again, the city lights blurring into a soft mosaic. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It had taken on a life of its own, moving faster than any single person could steer. And that was the point. By the time he went to bed, the draft legislation had been picked up by a national outlet. The headline read, "From One Flight to Federal Reform, the Push for Passenger Equity." Elias knew the next step was the most dangerous one the moment just before victory, when the opposition was at its most desperate. But he also knew something else. The story had moved beyond boardrooms and legal memos. It now lived in the hands of every passenger who had ever been told they didn't belong, and everyone who had refused to move. And that, he thought, was a story no CEO, not even Avery Holt, could shut down. Monday morning began with an unusual stillness. Elias had been through countless high-stakes meetings in his life, but this one carried a different weight. The NorthStar board had convened for what they were calling a strategic evaluation. In truth, it was their attempt to decide whether he was an asset or a liability. The conference room was glass-walled, perched high above the city, the skyline stretching out in every direction. 11 board members sat in a neat arc, each with a thick folder in front of them. At the far end sat Avery Holt, stone-faced, fingers laced. Elias took his seat without hurry. He didn't bother with a prepared speech. He wanted to respond to whatever they threw at him, in the moment. It began with polite criticism, disruption to operations, unintended, reputational risk phrases designed to sound objective. Then the sharper edges appeared. One member questioned his judgment in releasing the footage. Another suggested that his public advocacy created brand confusion. Elias listened to every word. When they finally paused, he leaned forward. "What you're calling brand confusion," he said, "is clarity for the people who pay to be on your planes. What you're calling disruption is accountability. If that threatens the brand, maybe the brand is the problem." Holt's jaw tightened. "We could have handled this internally." "You had years to handle it internally," Elias replied. "You didn't." A few members shifted in their seats. Elias continued, "This isn't about me. It's about a passenger policy that removes people from their seats without explanation or documentation. You've all seen the data. You've all seen the footage. This isn't hypothetical. It's structural." The board chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Ward, regardless of our personal feelings, we must consider shareholder interests." Elias cut in, calm but unyielding. "Shareholders aren't insulated from public sentiment anymore. They care about value. Yes, but value collapses when trust does. You can keep avoiding that truth, but sooner or later, it will land in your balance sheets." The room went quiet. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the chair said, "We'll take your points under advisement." Elias stood. "Do more than advise. Act." He walked out knowing the decision had already been made, in some of their minds, but also that the public pressure outside this room was now too strong to contain. That afternoon, his phone lit up with a different kind of news. The Passenger Equity and Transparency Act had gained co-sponsors from both parties. Hearings were scheduled. The language was clear. Any airline receiving federal contracts would be required to comply. By midweek, Holt's tone shifted entirely. He released a statement praising Mr. Ward's commitment to fairness and announcing that NorthStar would adopt the new protocols voluntarily, ahead of legislation. Elias read it once, then set it down. It was theater, but it was the right kind of theater, the kind that made backpedaling look like leadership. 2 days later, he boarded a NorthStar flight for the first time since Flight 482. This time, there were no whispers, no sidelong glances, no unexplained requests to move. As he settled into his seat, a small voice spoke from the aisle. "Excuse me, are you Mr.?" Ward Elias turned to see a little girl, no more than 8, holding her mother's hand. She wore a sky-blue cardigan and had the earnest gaze of someone about to ask something important. "Yes, I am," he said. Her mother smiled softly. "She saw you on TV." The girl nodded. "You made it so people can't just take your seat anymore." "Right." Elias felt his throat tighten. "Something like that," he said. "Thank you," she said simply, before her mother guided her toward their row. He watched them go, the small head of curls bobbing through the aisle, and for the first time since the day on Flight 482, he felt the air in the cabin ease around him. As the plane climbed, Elias looked out over the clouds, thinking of Melissa, Naomi, Daniel, the senators, the captain, and all the nameless passengers whose quiet discomfort had never been filmed, never gone viral, but had still mattered. He thought about how change was never one moment, never one person, but a chain of them, linked across years, across countless flights, each one making it harder for the next injustice to go unseen. When they landed, he didn't rush to get off. He waited, letting the aisle clear. As he stepped into the jet bridge, he caught sight of a framed placard on the wall, "Passenger Equity Protocol, effective January 1st. Underneath, in smaller print, "In recognition of all who have spoken, stood, and stayed." Elias paused, reading it twice. Then he walked on, the murmur of the terminal folding around him, his pace steady, his mind already on the next flight, the next fight, the next quiet act that would matter to someone he might never meet. Sometimes, injustice doesn't come with raised voices or violent acts. Sometimes, it's quiet, polite, wrapped in procedure, but the harm is just as real. On Flight 482, Elias Ward didn't just reclaim his seat, he reclaimed the dignity of every passenger who had ever been told, without words, that they didn't belong. His fight didn't stop at the cabin door. It reached boardrooms, Senate hearings, and finally, federal law. And yet, at the heart of it all, this story isn't about legislation or corporate statements. It's about people, the ones who speak up when it's hard, the ones who lend their voice when it's risky, the ones who refuse to let silence be the final answer. We tell these stories because every quiet act of courage matters, and because we can't afford to look away when someone's dignity is on the line. If this story moved you, share it, talk about it, keep it alive. And remember, the next time you see someone being pushed aside, you have a choice. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because the fight for justice is far from over.